Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński and you're watching Break the Fake. They make them, we break them, and tell you everything you need to know. Kazakhstan decided to do what the Kremlin dislikes the most: count the money and ask the question, where did it all come from? President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev announced that approximately $14 billion from a quote-unquote neighboring country had been laundered through one of Kazakhstan's banks. He diplomatically refrained from naming the country in question, but Moscow seems to have taken offense, as if it had been called out by name. Let's face it, Russian officials immediately understood that this was about them. In recent years, Kazakhstan has become not just a neighbor for many Russian citizens, but a financial window to the world, with accounts, cards, transfers, and attempts to pretend that sanctions simply do not exist. After Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Kazakh banks became a popular destination for Russians who are trying to circumvent international sanctions, transfer funds outside the Russian Federation, or simply live as if nothing had ever happened. But now the party is over. Kazakhstan is gradually closing its doors, quietly but very persistently. It is now prohibited to issue taxpayer identification numbers remotely to non-residents, read Russians, and mandatory biometrics have been introduced, as has regular customer identification. In other words, the banking system no longer operates on the see no evil principle, which could spell doom for Moscow's sanction-dodging El Dorado. Now, formally, Kazakhstan has not severed its alliance with Russia, but in practice, it is increasingly making it clear that being a neighbor does not mean being a laundry for dirty money. Astana is choosing a cautious but consistent line to minimize Russian influence, reduce economic dependence, and not risk its own financial system for the sake of someone else's war. The irony of the situation is that, until recently, Russian propaganda spoke of strong integration ties and Eurasian partnership. Now, this partnership increasingly resembles an entry checkpoint with the question, please show us the origin of your money? While Russian propaganda insists that Russia's role in the multipolar world is only growing, the reality is quite different. The Kremlin is losing credibility, even in places where it felt comfortable just yesterday. And instead of dodging incoming sanctions like Neo dancing across a hail of bullets in the Matrix, Moscow might be in for a bad time, as its partners take the red pill and recognize just how deep the rabbit hole of Russian money actually goes. Russian mouthpieces, accustomed to applause and triumphant reports in their own media, are surprised to find out that no one is waiting for them in Berlin this May. This is not because the Germans have forgotten about the holiday, but because Russia's aggression against Ukraine has made them unwelcome guests.
Помните, как это было в милые всякие 2000-е, 2010-е годы? Кто ездил в Европу там, по бизнесу или там, в туристическую поездку? Помните, как в Германии встречали 9 мая? В общем, подкрашивали танки, звучали песни советские, звучали. И, в общем, там венки несли к могилам, да? Для русских дорогих гостей, особенно бизнес-партнеров, устраивали целые дни победы в ресторанах. Старались пить за здоровье. А куда все это делось в 22 году?
It is rather paradoxical. First, you fly missiles over peaceful cities, wipe entire settlements off the face of the earth. You torture people, and then you wonder, why are you being ignored all of a sudden? The absence of Russian propagandists at events in Berlin demonstrates the classic conflict between the imaginary and the real worlds in which the Kremlin's information machine operates. They are used to any story about Russia in their media being an apotheosis of greatness and victory, where aggression and violence are presented as justified actions or defense of national interests. The real world, where these same actions lead to destruction, casualties, and international condemnation, does not correspond to their fantasies at all. Berlin and many European cities simply wish to show that aggression has consequences. No one wants to celebrate together with a country that kills civilians and destroys cities. Moscow's propaganda crew may do their little nostalgia trips all they like a Russian version of the 2016 trend. But there is a little difference they just fail to see. Just like putting a Snapchat dog filter on Sergei Lavrov won't make him a nice guy all of a sudden, the same way even making a peace deal right here and right now won't immediately bring back the good old days. And why? Well, because in 2016, even as many of us were busy playing Pokemon Go, Russia was already going full gotta catch 'em all with Ukrainian territories, and it never stopped. You can always forgive the cringe, but you should never forgive the war crimes. So, sorry guys, no flowers and parades in Berlin for you. Deal with it, I guess. Today, Simferopol is once again saying out loud what has long been whispered across Crimea. Local market entrepreneurs are outraged. The so-called authorities have sharply, several times over, raised the rent for market stalls. The reason is no secret. Money is needed, and urgently at that. It's all about the war, of course, because, as Napoleon once said, an army marches on its stomach.
Неужели мы голосовали за Россию для того, чтобы нас Россия оставила без средств к существованию? Почему администрация подставляет нашу Россию своими действиями? Чтобы люди теперь обижались. Украина работу давала, а при России остались без работы. Движение, вот то, что они предпринимают, они дискредитируют саму Россию. Вот в чем дело. Получается, 300 человек остается на старости. Кто на старости? Ну вы посмотрите, здесь нет ни 20-летних, ни 25-летних. От 40 до 60 лет народ. Нам куда идти? Кто нас возьмет на работу в таком возрасте?
Before the occupation, Crimea was far from a jewel of the empire, but was still a vibrant region with a thriving economy. The average monthly salary in Crimea in 2012 and 2013 was approximately between $350 and $400. Tourism was widespread and vibrant, with Ukrainians, Europeans, Crimeans from the mainland visiting the peninsula. Small businesses, markets, cafes, hotels operated without a war tax intended to buy more tanks. Rental prices for retail space were predictable. And most importantly, there was a sense of some future ahead, and not just future mobilization. After 2014, Crimea officially got back on its feet, as the Russians would say, but for some reason it never really recovered. The average salary in Crimea is now nominally higher, but given the current prices, workers often end up with less than before the illegal annexation. And remember that the difference here is 10 years. Between 2014 and 2024, the US dollar lost approximately between 30 and 35% of its purchasing power in real terms. What is now referred to in Crimea as a $380 salary was worth less than $290 back in 2014. Food prices in Crimea are higher than in many regions of the Russian Federation. Tourism is mainly official and compulsory, so it involves civil servants, military personnel, and people with travel vouchers. Business is suffocating under sanctions, inspections, and now a sharp increase in rent. The formula is simple: less income, more taxes, even higher rent. The war is far away, but the bill is here and now. And raising rents in Simferopol is not an economic decision. It is the Russian Empire's honest response to its supporters. You were needed because you served as a convenient argument for our military plans, but now we don't really need you, only the contents of your wallets. Crimea will not stop being Ukrainian just because Putin chose to occupy it. But living under Russian rule is quickly turning into a survival horror. From simple things like making ends meet financially to stuff like persecution and imprisonment. And that's what's at stake for every part of Ukraine which Russia wants to take over. Whenever there is talk of territorial concessions, don't think of real estate. Think of the thousands of people who might end up in a living hell, and a poorly managed one at that. And with this, we conclude this edition of Break the Fake. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.